Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello everyone, welcome here at Legacy. We are grateful for you. Some of you might have noticed we've got an exchange program going on with Fighting Men of Rhodesia. So sometimes I would be recording South African members who served with them, and sometimes we're recording Rhodesians who have something of interest to say or what we want to know about. And it's a system which is working out very well. It was actually one war. The Rhodesian Bush War is a place where the South Africans learned a lot. We were also there. The South African police counterinsurgency units were certainly there from the late 1960s, early 70s. They were fighting all the way there. That's where we learned the tricks of the trade. The Air Force was there, no doubts, with the helicopter support, the crews, the flight crews. And then Special Forces were also fighting in Rhodesia. And then there were a whole bunch of South Africans who just joined up and be a man amongst men. And if you speak to the top generals, the strategic thinkers, they will tell you that the ultimate aim at the end of the day, coming from Moscow, in those days the Soviet Union, or Communist China, North Korea, all of them wanted to get to South Africa. Why? Because it's a strategic country. It's where it's situated. It controls the sea route, the Cape of Good Hope sea route. It's why it was invaded twice by the Brits. And it will probably, if a world war break out, South Africa will play a major role because of that. And so the country will be attacked by someone. But anyway, that's for the future. Here we're dealing with history. And one of the people which was interviewed was Greg Ashton of 1 and 2 Recce. A fantastic episode. Two of them actually, fantastic 2 episodes. He spoke well. I'm really proud of Greg. And he was on Legacy as well, but so what? You know what? Whenever you speak to somebody twice about the same subject, different stories come out because you get different angles. And so I'm sure you will enjoy this one as well. And there's a standing invitation, guys, if you were involved in Rhodesia in any sense of a word, please contact me so that we can put you in touch with Tony and John and everybody else here at Fighting Men of Rhodesia. And for the Rhodesians, you're welcome with us as well. At the end of the day, we fought the same enemy. So thanks, and let us hear what Greg has to say to Tony Ballinger.
Good day to you. My name is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia series. We have as a special guest today, Greg Ashton from the South African Defence Forces. He was in Special Forces and D Squadron SAS, which is pertinent to us. And if you've seen from previous episodes, anybody that fought in Rhodesia or fought for the Rhodesian Security Forces from South Africa is more than welcome to come on this channel and have a chat. And I think what we're going to hear will be very interesting and illuminating to a lot of us. So welcome to you, Greg. Good to have you on the program. And
thanks, Tony.
We've just discussed you've got lovely weather there and beautiful weather here in England, which is very rare. I'm going to mark it on the calendar. So going forward, we just follow the same format, really, Greg. Could you give us some background of where you came from and who you are and your folks, where you went to school, etc.?
Sure. I was born, I'm still one of the baby boomers. I was born in 1959, a little bit younger than you. Born in Johannesburg. Both my parents were artists. And when I say artists, my father was in advertising, which was something he'd learned when he came back from the war. He'd been in the Air Force in 21 Squadron. He'd served in North Africa and in Italy. He was my hero when I was young. You hear those war stories and everything else that's great about it. Well, so we think it's great. And he started in a new sort of discipline in the market called advertising. And so he was a senior creative director in advertising. My mom had gone that route as well, but also being the mother of 3 kids, she could not sustain that. So she became a fine artist, and she did exceptionally well as an artist, mostly portraits, but a lot of landscapes as well. And we lived in Johannesburg on Northcliffe Hill. In those days where we were based, it was still fairly wild from beyond where we were. If you looked out on the hill, Northcliffe Hill is quite prominent in Johannesburg. For those of you who do not know, there's a water tower on top, and we used to clamber up the 150 meters or so to the water tower. And from where we looked, there were farms about 10 or so kilometers away, maybe even less, and we could see giraffe and we could see wildebeest and various antelope and so on there. Today, that is a built-up area, and the built-up area stretches well beyond that. So that is sort of where I was born. I had an older brother, Mark, who's passed away now, and I've got a younger sister, Tracy. We then moved to our farm that we had down in the old Eastern Transvaal, which is in Mpumalanga now. And it was a banana farm with a few other crops. My parents decided they wanted to give us a better upbringing. I think a change of scenery in terms of their career was also something that they really wanted to try and attempt. And I think that's what happens when you become a parent. You decide you want something slightly better. So in 1963, 64, we moved down, sold our house here, and moved down to the country. We stayed in somebody else's farmhouse while they were away, while our house was being built, also up on a hill. We had the most magnificent view, and the world was my oyster.
Brilliant.
Here's a little boy of 3 or 4 years old, being introduced to an area which was pretty wild. Where our farm ended, there was a lot of the forestry areas had started, very much like the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe. And I just loved it. We had all the antelope and buck you wanted, from kudu to duiker to bushbuck. Occasionally we had lion, which used to come our way from the Kruger National Park up our way. Not often, but they were there on occasion. A lot of leopard, and every kind of snake and any kind of bird and so on there. So that is what I grew up with.
Idyllic life, eh? Absolutely idyllic.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think of that book, Old Yeller, about the little boy going out and with his hunting rifle and things like that. And very early, I had to learn how to use our rifle. We had a 22410 combination, over and under. A rifle is a tool, like a gun is a tool. Often people say, oh, you're dangerous because you've used firearms, or you might carry a firearm. I said, give me a spade and I can show you where I'll bury you as well and chop you up into pieces. Okay, that's speaking in jest. But it's a tool. It's exactly the same.
Of course, yeah.
And you have to treat it with respect. You have to clean it, look after it. So my brother went off to boarding school in Pretoria, to Pretoria Boys High. And when I was old enough, I went to the local school there. Afrikaans school, 100 kids. I was number 101, and I was English speaking. Even though my mom was Afrikaans, we spoke English at home, and hers, strangely enough, her first language was Zulu. So I spoke Zulu better than Afrikaans for the first few years, until my Afrikaans was a lot better, and eventually it became better than my home language, because you converse with everybody in Afrikaans. And put me at odds with my culture, which is half Irish, half Afrikaans. So go figure.
A big war going on
there. Exactly. So I had the opportunity with the dogs. We had 2 dogs, and I'd take the rifle this is when I was old enough. And I say to my mom, bye, Mom, I'll see you in 2 or 3 days. And she said, where are you going to be going. And I said, you see that hill up there? And I'd point to something about 3 or 4 miles away. It was very hilly. And I said, if there's any problem, you will see smoke coming from that hill there. There was a road nearby, so if there was a problem, she could always drive around on the dirt road and hoot, Beetle, and she can come and check up on me and make sure I was fine. But you know what? We were always fine. It's one of those things. You learn how to avoid snakes. You avoid the dangers. You don't make fires where you can't. And if you learn that at a very early age, you have respect for the bush. You learn to love the bush. And for me, just absolute heaven. It became so bad that when we had guests that come around, I'd run away and go and spend time in the bush. I didn't want to see them. I became very much insular in many respects. Anyway,
incredible. I mean, that's a real Jock of the Bushveld story right there. I reckon you could write a book on that, couldn't you?
I suppose I could. Strangely enough, my father's second name was Percy because his great godfather was Percy Fitzpatrick. So there's a little bit of history going back there as well.
Gee, what a lifestyle. Fantastic.
So then I went to boarding school after that for the last years of primary school in a town called White River. And that was really, really difficult because the difference between English and Afrikaans was very marked. And the Afrikaners used to pick on us. It's funny, people talking today say, but you didn't have the prejudices and things like that they have today. No, we had the same. If you remember, it was only 20 years or so after World War II, and South Africa was very much divided. A lot of people supported Germany because of the old historical background of the Boers and the Dutch and the German influence. And with South Africa then being part of the Commonwealth in those days, and people being forced to go and fight in then German Southwest Africa, it created problems back in South Africa. But that after the war, 20 years after, people still hadn't buried the hatchet, and it was very much the English against the Afrikaans. And you've got to learn at a very early age to fight for yourself. Did you ever read that book, The Power of One?
No, but I've heard of it. What's it about?
It's about a guy who gets picked on in South Africa. I think he also came from Rhodesia in those days, and he gets picked on by Afrikaans guys, and they try and beat him up. Because he was at boarding school, and he had a single mom. So anybody who might want to read that book, it is really worthwhile in terms of going back in time. I know they made a movie. I think Morgan Freeman was in the movie. I can't remember whom else.
Wow. But
it's pretty much a lot the same thing. Until I learned to stand up for myself, my father decided that I needed to learn something. I wasn't a big guy in those days. I played a lot of sport, but in primary school, I was still a real wimp. And I could not do certain things because you don't value yourself. You don't think you're capable. I was useless at cross country. I was fairly good at cricket, fairly good at soccer. And that was about it. I don't want to play rugby because for me, it wasn't sort of something I wanted to do until I got to high school. Obviously, that changed. But then my dad sent me off to go and learn some self-defense. I joined the local karate club, and I worked my way up. I think by the time I left primary school, I must have been like a green belt, something like that. I know I was due to go for the next grading, but it taught me confidence more than anything else. And one of the big Afrikaans guys, by the name of Reno, tried to pick on my friends and I. And I had a friend called Chris Hamilton, who was a lot smaller than me, and I stepped in, and Reno said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I did something that I shouldn't have done. I gave him a roundhouse Mawashigeri kick, and I knocked him down flat. Well, needless to say, I never had anybody picking on me again. This is one of those things. And, if push comes to shove, you do what you have to do. And I'm a pretty patient person. I'll let things sometimes ride because not that I don't want to confront an issue, but I often believe try the peacekeeping effort first and so on. But if not, you got to bear the consequences. So that was it. I went off to English-speaking high school in Nelspruit called Lowveld High. When I went into my next grade, or standard in those days, standard 6, very different. A lot of influence from Portuguese boys. Mozambique had just fallen in 1975. But there were a lot of people already coming over. So this was in 1968, 69, I guess. My record is my memory in terms of dates is not that accurate. But anyway, I did the whole 5 years at high school, in boarding school. I loved it. It was a growth period for me. Didn't get out as much as I wanted to into the bush and so on, but where the school had been built, it was out in the middle of nowhere. Today, it's right in the middle of the town. But in those days, we used to hop the fence and go out and go and pick up bugs and settle snares and traps and go and make fires on the hill and do things like that. That's what boys do, you know. I started playing rugby in Standard 6, and I did very well the first year. And so well, they said you make flank, and you could mostly end up making first team if you qualify at the end of the year. I broke my wrist very badly, my right wrist, in a horse riding accident on the farm over Easter, and I couldn't do anything with that because my arm was in plaster, and because it was a complicated break, they said, we advise you not to play rugby, and by the time it had healed, the rugby season was more or less over. Next year, same thing happened, started, and now I was doing the selection for first team. I got into the first team, played one small exhibition match, went home for the Easter weekend, and lo and behold, I did the same wrist again on another horse, but this time I damaged my wrist and my jaw and ribs and things like that. So the guy said to me, that wrist is now permanently stuffed. Unless you put steel pins in it, which would then prevent you from bending your wrist, you shouldn't play rugby again. So I did everything else. I did cross country, gymnastics, swimming, and I became a real string bean. And I wasn't the most academic type of person out there, but I did well. I did well enough. My parents had gone through a divorce when I was around about 11, and I know my mom was struggling. And so I did the best I could. I was a good boy, put it that way. Although if I were left to my own, I most probably would have done a whole lot more. But I think that tends to stick with you in terms of your reputation. And you're not one of the guys who are playing rugby and first team cricket and things like that. So you're not seen as one of the capable guys. And I remember in our final year in high school, the national conscription was very current at that stage, like it was in Rhodesia. We'd seen all of the things of all the photographs and the news reports from what was happening in Rhodesia. I had friends that were up there, so it made it even more realistic in a way. But to me, it was still like another country. Little did I know what was going to happen. And I remember them coming around, the guys talking to us and said, what would you like to do when you go off to the army? I said, I'd like to become paratrooper. And scoff, because I certainly wasn't the tough guy that was there. Anyway, finished high school. I got university entrance, and I got some bursaries as well to go to university, which was quite nice. I had 1 or 2 A's, and I thought, well, the world is my oyster, but I have one thing to do. I have to go and do the 2 years of national service. In fact, it was still a 1 year, but as we went in, they increased it to the 2-year period. Jeez. And for those who don't know, the South African structure was that you did your 2 years, and then for the next 2 years, you were obligated to do 30 days a year, as in the territorial or citizen force regiments. And they were all around the country because South Africa was supposedly under attack by the communist forces that were outside. The ANC were the biggest at this stage, and they weren't doing that much, 75, 76, but, you know, the government also kept us under wraps as far as propaganda was concerned. So we didn't know anything about the outside world. And when we started reading that, we realized that things were afoot and bigger things than we were aware of. But that only came to light later on. Everybody pro the government that we knew of. And, you know, I grew up and I had a black friend. Her name was Sablon. And although he was South African, born and raised, he was of the Swazi tribe. I wanted him to go to school with me when I was in primary school, and I couldn't understand why he could not. I used to herd cattle with him. I used to run in a loincloth. I was friends with them. I used to do everything they used to do. And yet, you know, the government had said, no, you can't. You're going to go to this school, and they had to go to that school. So for me, I never sort of understood the political situation, and obviously until I got older. But the people that you are living with and their friends and everybody else's friends and the school kids, everybody sort of gets indoctrinated by the same thing, whether or not they believe it or whether or not they are aware of what's happening. But there were a few people who were dissidents who fought against and said, you don't know what you're believing, you're doing the wrong thing. I didn't know. I thought I was doing the right thing. And when it came around to be mustered and go off to the Defense Force, I was doing it for the love of the country, for God and country, as they say. So on my 18th birthday, I arrived at an infantry regiment I'd been called up, called 4 4th South African Infantry Regiment in Middelburg, which was not too far away from where we were. We arrived by train, and my dreams and aspirations of the military world and the real world were shattered. I grew up in a very protective environment. My parents never swore. I never heard a swear word at all. I mean, not that they were church going. We went, when there were funerals, weddings, and special occasions. But here I was exposed to a sergeant and a corporal in charge of our troop. Boy, and I heard words that I never knew happen. I actually asked the guy, what's he saying? And the guy looked at me as though I was stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome to the real world. Anyway, I didn't stay there very long. I always thought I'd like to better myself and do something else. And they had guys from signals and the guys from intelligence who came around. So they're looking for people. Would we be interested? Then the paratroopers came around, and they said they're looking for guys to go there, but we have to pass the number of tests. So we had to run and do push-ups and sit-ups and a number of other things. The guy stopped me when I got to 180 push-ups. I was fit and lean. I'd been training for this all the time. He said, you got it, you got it. So within a week, we were shipped out by train, went to Bloemfontein. In Bloemfontein, I did my basic training as any soldier would. So you go through your basic period, and I think that is 8 weeks or 12-week period. Qualified with that. And before you go on to your counterinsurgency and your bush training, your bush warfare training, when you're at the parachute regiment, they put you through the PD course. So you have to do PD course, which is quite tough. So it's 2 weeks of PT every day, Monday to Friday, and it whittles out the guys very quickly. It also makes you fitter. And we were a week and a half through it when some other guys came to visit, guys from 1 Reconnaissance Commando in those days. So during our tea break, they gave us an extended tea break. They said, if you guys are interested, go down to where the auditorium is, go and watch the video and so on. And when you're finished, come back. So I went down to go and have a look. And in those days, they had the most incredible, emotional, and provocative movie, which they showed about a young guy and what he was doing and what the training had gone through and real things. And it whetted my appetite. I thought, this is what I want. So at the end of it, they stood up, anybody interested? My hand went up. I said, yes, please. I'm very keen. I'd like to do it. So I signed the paperwork and so on. They said, okay, before you do this, some tests, you got to run. So we had to run a 1.5 miler, which is a 2,4, then do the sit-ups and the push-ups, all of those things. I creamed it. It was easy peasy. And then they said, okay, we'd like to take you, but we can only collect you in a week's time. The train will arrange to take you out of here. I thought, that's fine. Went back to the rest of the group, and now we're going to carry on with the PT course. And the guy looked at me and said, you want to desert us, eh? You want to be what they say in Afrikaans, a verraaier. So you want to be a turncoat and you want to go to the other side. You go and sit over there. And I remember the instructor looking at me like, and I said, I'll be back. A bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Yeah.
I'll be back.
I'll be
Okay.
back.
It was a long before then. And he just laughed at me and shook his head. Anyway, we were shipped off to another regiment called 3 South African Infantry Regiment, which is in Potchefstroom. And for those who don't know, Potchefstroom is about 2 hours drive from Johannesburg in a westerly direction. It's very flat, very open. The equestrian center was based there, like Grey Scouts, and there were some of the armored regiments there as well. Nice and flat, open, good place for them to train. Did our pre-selection training there inside the same regiment. And we had instructors from 1 Reconnaissance Commando, which later on became 1 Reconnaissance Regiment. That's a few years later. And there must have been 180 of us. And they grilled us, and we walked, and we ran, and we walked, and we ran, even on public holidays. I remember one day we went in, I think it was Republic Day or one other day, another, and we all went in, had a big lunch with steak and sadza and a beer. It was really nice. And we came out, sort of think it was a holiday, and the guy said, you think you're smart, don't you? Fall in. We did punishment PT with a sandbag between the barracks for 2 hours. Eventually, it was sadza, meat, and beer on what we were running and falling down. They blow the whistle, you pick it up and you run. They blow the whistle, you fall down. Then you leopard crawl, they blow the whistle, you get up and run, and you did that for 2 hours. I mean, we were finished. A lot of guys left that day because they just couldn't take it anymore. Anyway, after the period that we had been there, which was about 6 weeks, we had to go off to the Military Medical Institute in Pretoria, and there they do all the evaluations, the medical stuff and the psychological stuff, and you put through all the tests and things that you need to do. They don't tell you what the results are. And then we came back, and then the day that we finished, this is where they separate the goats from the sheep, and I was not a sheep, I was a goat. They said I was told I was medically unfit. I said, why? No, they couldn't answer that. Often it's like the police would say, no, we're not allowed to tell you that. No, they couldn't answer that, or they didn't want to tell you. And I did not have much of a choice. My world was shattered. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do then is go and join the equestrian center. But I couldn't do that as a national serviceman. The only way I could do it is if I joined up the permanent force and go and signed up as a regular. And another guy by the name of Rick van Daro and I decided we were going to do that. But they had to post us out somewhere until they could arrange this for us. So they sent us to a regiment in Kimberley called 11 Commando, which was a normal infantry regiment, and we were there. And we were what in effect they call an RTU, a return to unit. But they don't send you back to your old unit that you came from. Yeah. They just send you anywhere. I think it's like dartboard. They just select where you're going to go. Having that name on your file is one of the worst things you could ever have, because generally you are deemed as unfit, useless, whatever, and they just pick on you. And there were guys there who just loved picking on us. They just wanted to make our life a misery. So the platoon corporal and the sergeant were a real bunch of meanies. But Rick and I were fit. And what they do punishment for us, punishment PT. We could outlast them. We would go with our whole platoon, and the guys would say, you got to run. And this is what they like doing. They're trying to break you down and trying to build unity. Run to that hill over there, go and collect a leaf from that tree, then that tree, and this tree, and so on. Eventually, I said to the guys, you know what? They're doing what they want to do with us. Let's take the leadership role here. So I said, okay, guys, we're going to collect a branch from every tree in every area around us so they can't send us back again. So we did that. The guys came back, and so they said, you think you're clever, eh? Okay, go and get your kit, just Rick and I. Full kit onto the parade ground, drill PT. The sergeant that was in charge of us, 2.5 hours later, he keeled over. He went into heat exhaustion and had to be hauled off to hospital. And we were still fine. We were whistling tunes and things like that. Anyway, cut the story short. I ended up going to Pretoria to sign up permanent force to go to the equestrian center. And when I got there, the guys who'd been on the group with me before had just finished their selection. So this was around about July. And they just finished their selection, and there were a lot of guys that I knew, and they happened to be in Pretoria. And the guy said, it's really great here. We're now starting our cycle as a Special Forces soldier. It's a 9-month cycle you've got to go through. It's a bit longer today because they amended it and they adapted it. And I think now it's close on 42 weeks. I think it's pretty long. Excuse me. Be that as it may. And I said, so what happens if I didn't pass selection or they deemed me unfit? They said, we have a support component. Like in any regiment that you have, there's a support component, and they support the guys who are operational. There's a lot that they can do, and in many instances, they're involved in the fight as well. So I thought, hey, okay, that's what I want to do. My friend Rick said, well, are you leaving now? I said, no, I'm not going to continue with you for the equestrian regiment. I think I'm going to go and speak to the guys at Special Forces HQ. So I said to the guy who was supposed to be attesting us to sign up, I told him I know who I need to go and see where to go. He said, he doesn't know anybody. I said, give me a few days. Let me just stay here. So I went off to the HQ, Special Forces HQ, which is in the old building below the central prison, which is still there today. Very much like Sandhurst, those old type of buildings, double-story, triple-story buildings, the old Victorian type design. And I went to announce my presence. I said, I'd like to see General Lutz, who was then in charge, the General Officer Commanding Special Forces. They said, you're going to have to wait. He's busy. They had an operation on the go at that stage, and obviously he was involved in radio comms and with various officers that were coming through. So I sat outside the office on a bench. There was a young lieutenant, a young woman who was sitting there. She was like the edge, and she was controlling everything. Now, I'm dumb. I'm stupid. I don't even have a beret because I haven't even really qualified in my thing. So I'm just wearing a bush hat, and I'm sitting there, and everybody comes past. I stand up and salute and sit down. At least I know the difference between commissioned and non-commissioned officers. And there was this old guy, looked like Colonel Sanders from KFC. in a black suit who was in and out every day, white beard, goatee, and so on, in and out, and I greeted him every day. And so on the third day, late in the afternoon, the Edge says to me, "You can go in. The general's waiting for you."
Good Lord, what a wait.
So yeah, so now I'm waiting. So as I'm doing that, this elderly guy comes past me like it. He says, "Follow me." He must be the general secretary or aide-de-camp or something like that. So I follow him in this office, massive office, Winston sofas on the one side, boardroom on the other side, world map, projection, things like this, and then display cabinets, and then drinks and things like that, and really nicely laid out. There on the far side is a big window at the desk with a leather inlay and all of those things, 3 or 4 chairs in front of it. So I go and sit down. I'll stand there first until I'm given the permission to sit. And the elderly gentleman goes behind. I thought, well, he's setting up for the general, and he pulls out the chair and he sits down. He says, "Rifleman Ashton, you can sit down." So I said, "I'm waiting for the general." He says, "I am the general."
Faux pas.
Yeah. So he said, "Why are you here?" So I started talking about it. He says, "I know." And he opened up my medical file. He had it in front of him. He said, "You were turned down because your eyesight is too bad." I used to wear glasses. I'm a bit short-sighted, so I'm not the best when I lose them, but I can still see. Okay. He said, "The concern is that if you happen to lose them in operation, that you would not be able to continue, and you'd be at risk of not seeing the enemy, not being good in the bush, and you'd be a risk to your team." He says, so I said, "I don't care. I want to join the regiment. I want to join the support component of the regiment so I can be of help to the guys there." I said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I am." So he duly signed my paperwork and so on. I went to the stores, and now as a permanent force career soldier, I went to go and draw all the kit that they issue. So there's 2 trunks full of stuff, and they put me on to train to Durban. Got to Durban, I got picked up by a duty officer, got taken to the regiment. And the first thing they do, take you in to see the officer commanding, who was one of the founding members of Recce, and he was then a Major, John Moore. And I went in to go and see him, and he said to me, "Why are you here?" Now, everybody knows why you're coming because they've been briefed either telephonically or they got in those days a telex to inform them. And I informed him. I said, "This is why I'm here." But he said, "Did you really want to do selection course? Do you really want to become operator?" I said, "With everything that I have, I wouldn't have signed up permanent force if I couldn't. But to get closest to the action, if I could, I would." He said, "But your glasses are a problem." I said, "I've just been issued with contact lenses." In those days, the first soft contact lenses that came out, and I think they were like 1,500 Rand each, which in today's terms, you convert it to pounds, it's mostly like 150 pounds. In those days, it was really expensive.
Huge.
So Major John Moore then said to me, "I tell you what, if you really want to become an operator so badly and to do the selection, I will turn a blind eye your medical, because what they're saying about your eyes is not so bad. We can test the theory and the actual practical application of contact lenses. You go and do the selection course, the next one coming up. But there'd be 3 months before the next selection course, which was due, which was in November. So what you need to do then is fall in with the rest of the guys who you were on selection before. They all doing their basic courses. So the basic courses would be foreign weapons. It would be demolitions. Would be working with small boats and submarines, be signals, would be basic medical stuff, driving course to learn to drive all the vehicles and so on. So there were 2 or 3 of us that were in the same group. And he said, "What I do expect of you is that I don't kick you off, that I've got justification. You need to score more than 85% on all the courses you do. Flew through the courses. My average was about 97% in theory and practical. So I loved the courses I was doing, and I got exposed to certain guys who came down from Rhodesia who were down. So we had some of the SAS guys who came down to join us. So they were doing basic demolition, and they were doing some radio work with us, and then also some basic medical training, because some of the basic medical training, we went to spend time in the hospitals at night over weekends on casualty, stitching up people and bandaging them, etc. So this is my first introduction to the guys from the SAS, and they would arrive. They'd be just given a local uniform, no insignia. You did not know what rank they were, but from what you deduce when you're working with them, they were anything from the rank of corporal up to sergeant. I think we even had a color sergeant with us at one instance. So you get to know the guys. Loved the interaction and so on. And they were talking a lot more about the Bush War, and I thought, this is interesting. I'm very interested in this. Anyway, finished our 9-month training period. Bushcraft trekking survival for me was an absolute holiday. I loved it. There were some people there that just struggled with it. I loved it. It was like being on the farm again. In fact, the first thing that I caught was my instructor in a whip snare. I never owned up to it, but he knew afterwards. He said, "You bastard." Anyway, so you finish off bushcraft tracking survival, and your last big course is what we called minor tactics. And then when everything comes together and you live and work in the bush like an operational soldier, and sometimes even like a tur, because you really are filthy. You don't get a chance to bath, and it's really tough. And that's over a period of about 8 or 9 weeks, where you learn to lay ambushes and do all of those things. So now when you finished, you qualified. Our selection course group that I had been on in November, we started with 45 people who went on our selection course. This is after being whittled down, sorry, not 45, 185. Started on the PT course in Durban. I had to do the PT course all over again, the one that I'd done at Parachute Battalion. 2 weeks of misery. Our initial group was intake of 861. So 861 whittled down to 185. After our PT course, there were 45 of us. We did the jumping course in Bloemfontein, and I still had a chance to go to the instructor and say, "Hey, I said I'll be back," which I did. And we jumped into the Caprivi where we did our selection, and when we were finished, there were only 10 of us who passed the selection course. So it was quite strange.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that's 8%.
Yeah, it was tough going, but I had somebody on who was later on my bushcraft tracking and survival instructor, who was then a color sergeant or staff sergeant. And he said to me, "Ashton, you're not going to make it." Now, don't say to me, "You can't do it." And that was the inspiration that I needed. And anyway, finished. So after our minor tactics, you now actually qualified, but you're not a fully fledged member of the unit until you've actually done an operation. Because if you do an operation, that is when the guys see how you bond with the older guys, whether your training has come together, whether you've got what they need in terms of fire. When you're under fire, your baptism of fire, how do you handle that? How do you deal with it? So we did a number of small operations, sometimes designated to other groups. We worked with Chief of Staff Intelligence in Angola with UNITA. We did 1 or 2 other minor operations. I was designated to a group called Bravo Group. We were the guys that did the work. There was Alpha Group, and these were the glory boys. They did the free fall, and they did all of these things. They went to the nice place. We didn't. Our group commander was really tough, a guy called Hannes Venter. And Hannes trained and trained and trained us and grilled us. And often you think, why? And there was an old saying that said, train hard in training and fight easy in battle. And it was one of the, he used to grind us. And even sometimes on weekends, he said, "You guys are doing nothing. Come, we're going to go and do something." And I was by far the youngest of our group. I was 19 when I was 18 when I passed selection, 19 when I qualified as an operator. And so we'd been involved in some smaller operations. And then the guys who took, as they normally would, we got another operation that's just coming up. You need to load your kit. Just bring your basics with you. And they told us what to take: 1 change of clothing, our toiletries and things like that. And they flew us from Durban to Pretoria. And we got on board at Dakota, and we flew from Pretoria north over the Matopos, and we flew low. They don't call it a vomit comet for nothing. Yep. And so we got there around about August. And what month is suicide month in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia?
October. Yeah.
This is leading up to it. So it's getting pretty warm. For those of you who don't know what suicide month is, for both Zambia and Rhodesia, suicide month is when it gets exceptionally hot, and I mean very hot, and there's no rain, and everybody just on everybody's nerves, and people are known to commit suicide because they can't deal with it. Anyway, so we flew up, went to Salisbury, under cover of darkness. We were then taken into the barracks, the SAS barracks, and we taken to one side. We weren't supposed to interact or deal with anybody, but there's a place they called the Winged Stagger.
This is now one Recce, is that right, Greg?
Yeah. So this is Bravo Group from one Recce that we now gone up to Salisbury. We've now gone into the SAS barracks. We're told not to mingle with anybody, and
And
course, don't turn
did you have any
I-
idea? Did you have any idea why you were sent up there?
No, on the plane they told us to change into clothing, so we were issued with fatigues. All of our kit was packed into other stuff and labeled and so on. They said you're not going to see that again now, except the toiletries. And that was it. So now we knew where we were. I mean, you got a good idea when you're flying over the Matopos and so on. You know where you're going.
Yeah.
And we'd heard rumors of guys being up there because Alpha Group had been up there, but we hadn't seen or heard anything. They kept it very much under wraps. And in fact, as we were landing, they were taking off and they were coming back to South Africa. So we ended up that night that we got there, we went down to the Wing Stagger, which was the pub. The guy said, "Oh, who are you?" And well, the cat was out of the bag. They knew who it was. So they said, "Oh, these are the guys from what was then called D Squadron." We felt pretty green because you're seeing this clothing. It still hasn't even been worn in as well with stable belts and things like that. It was really not very nice. But they sort of looked at us disdainfully.
How did you feel putting on Rhodesian camouflage? Was it alien? Was it, just...
It wasn't. It wasn't. It was foreign because we tend to work outside of the country when we did in greens. I'd worked in a number of in many years later in other fatigues in different colors. I worked in rice fleck, I'd worked in British, I'd worked in Tanzania, and I worked in all different colors. So this was like the first time. But also because with Rhodesians, you feel like usurping their pride in a way, and you're not really a Rhodesian.
Greg, for the sake of our international viewers, behind your head is an example of the Rhodesian camouflage. I believe it's been rated the 5th most effective in the world. And if I'm not mistaken, I'd like to be corrected on this. It was designed by a woman doodling on a napkin, and it became printed eventually. And so by your right ear is the wings and dagger of the SAS, who wins theirs. And if you could shift your head slightly, we'll see the insignia of one Recce. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Right. So you've now arrived in Salisbury. You don't know what you're there for. You're in Rhodesian uniform, and can you take it on from there?
Sure. So, you're feeling a little bit spare, to use sort of a colloquial term. You're in somebody else's uniform. You're in foreign ground. You know that something is about to happen. Operations, undoubtedly. What, we don't know. So, we were mustered the next morning. We were briefed by the local, by the intel officer from D Squadron, and took us through various things, the do's and the don'ts, and what we can, and what our cover story was if we had to go out into town or anything like that. And we would be given a basic course of orientation, just so that we could fit in with the rest of them. If we had to work with anybody from C Squadron, what would happen? I don't think they knew exactly what they were going to do with us then, although our Alpha Group had been working down south in the Recce and Triangle area at a place called Mabolauta, where we ended up going as well, but we didn't know at that stage. And because of the war was changing very much on the Russian front, which was on the Eastern Highlands, if you go from Buffalo Range all the way up to Umtali and into Mozambique, things were changing. And I didn't know, and I think they didn't know exactly how they're going to utilize us. I'm sure there was a bigger plan. So we were given a basic orientation. I remember meeting with a lot of the senior guys, the senior NCOs. I was still only a one striper in those days, so you don't really have much say in the matter. I need to add at that stage that a whole lot of guys from 2 Recce had joined us as well. Now, 2 Recce was a citizen force or territorial regiment based in Johannesburg, and there must have been 8 or 9 of them who came up with us on the trip. So they were part and parcel of the team, and it was really great to have them there because they gave us a different perspective, and we knew some of them we'd done operations with as well. And the citizen force guys or the territorial guys, if they're not rusty and they're current with everything else, they add immense value to any regiment like ours. I assume even with the SAS and various other regiments, if you look at the RLI and things like that, exactly the same. So we had to undergo some basic training, and that's how they worked with an LMG, light machine gun. We were under the tutelage of Sergeant Johnny Masson, who took no prisoners. It was really tough because the Rhodesian way of doing things was a little bit different to the South African way of doing things. But you know what? You adapt quickly. No, you don't do this, you do that, and so on. very much more British, where the South Africans had learned very much more the South African Afrikaans adaptation of the old British methodology in terms of the schooling in the military.
Yeah.
So we did that for about a week and a half. Then they told us we were ready, we were being shipped out. We had no idea where we were going to. And by Dakota, they flew us down south to a little place called Mabalahuta, which is on the Nuanetsi River. It's near Recce Triangle. We thought it was a nice area. Meantime, this is one of the main infiltration routes for coming up the Nuanetsi River.
Absolutely.
And when we got there, it was a real bush camp. Everybody's got their little bivvies that they're sleeping under. They told us that's where you're going to go and lie over there, and the other guys are there inside where the trenches were. You need to know where the long drops are, where the ops room is, and where the kitchen is, more importantly, and where the vehicle park was, and we were right on the landing strip. And nice thing, they don't tell you about some of the things there. There's a little red ant that you get down there, and at nighttime, if you don't know about it, you go to sleep, and you wake up at night like we all did, and you hear this squeaking noise, like tweet, 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 tweet. You have no idea what it is, and with your little torch, you shine down on to see what it is. Your sleeping bag is just covered in these things, and they get into anything, and they bite like crazy. So the first night you don't sleep, and then later on you learn what to do. You put up your bivvy, you dig trenches around, you pour diesel in all the time, and that's the way it works. Even your guy ropes that you have, even put diesel on that so they can't get in. Hey, and it was great being there. They gave us a bit of time to adapt. We played volleyball during the day. It's flipping hot down there and dry. This is now going into October. There were a lot of guys from C Squadron who were there. They were recuperating. There was a guy called Wayne Ross Smith, who's deceased now. Wayne joined us many years later at One Recce, and a few other guys they'd been in contact with had gone into a military base, they'd attacked, and Wayne had got shot up quite badly. So they wanted to utilize the guys and not feel sorry for them having them home at the base, but put them into where they could do some use. So he's walking around on crutches, and there were a few other guys there as well, and they sort of gave us some of the basic lay of the land rules and things you do and don't do. And within 2 days, we got our first ops briefing, and we were going to do what Alpha Group had done, go into the Russian front. And the only way to get there was by Dakota at night. They drop you off by parachute. And our brief was to go in and to really create havoc for the enemy. So the enemy is Frelimo at this stage. And Frelimo was supporting Zandla. Zebra was coming out of Zambia at that stage. So this was primarily Zandla that was coming over, and there were a lot of them. And our objective was to lay ambushes for as many as we could get to enable the security forces to also pinpoint where the Zandla military camps were. So we went in. So they drop in by parachute at night, stow away your parachute, take it out if you could. Rarely it didn't happen. And then early you'd be there that night. You'd be in encampment where you are lying for the night, and on guard duty the next morning early we'd be going out. We had maps we were working off, and invariably we were laying ambushes on the roads or the railway tracks, or if somebody we knew was coming along. And this is what we did for months on end. They drop in at night, and you do the operation. You'd be there for 2 or 3 days, sometimes a bit longer. You're only a team of 6, so sometimes 2 teams of 6. So sometimes there could be 12, but invariably teams of 6. It's fine if you're laying ambushes and you scoot and run, but it's a problem when you run into larger groups, which are battalion size. Often it would happen.
And were you mixed in with the SAS guys, or did the South African guys operate separately?
We were operating separately. C Squadron was operating, I think, out of Umtali and further north out of Kariba, and also at one stage in Wankie. There was stuff there, because I ended up going to all of those places on standby at a later stage, where I had to go and stand in to go and assist some of our guys that were there, but I wasn't operationally involved at that stage. I'll touch on that briefly later.
How did, just start getting into the stage where I'd like to start asking questions. How did you feel fighting for Rhodesia at this point? I mean, it sounds like they hadn't even asked you. Did it meet with any resentment or rejection from the guys?
Not at all. If anything, I think the guys were really gung-ho and eager. I think some guys hadn't had the chance of having real fights on their hands. I think they really wanted to. And I think the law of the bush and bush law, LORE, and also the stories that you hear and things that you see, we knew how good the Rhodesian soldiers were. Whether you were conventional infantry, whether we were RLI, RAR, SAS, Scouts, it didn't really make a difference. The guys were really good. And the Air Force, you never took for granted. We saw what the Air Force was capable of, especially with the little twin-engine Cessnas and the various other aircraft. And
The Lynx,
the Lynx. And the pilots were amazing, especially on the Alouettes.
Mm.
I took my hat off to the Alouettes. And when you've got an Alouette which is stripped down, you're sitting on a plank in the back because you're making it as light as possible to carry a team of 6. It's not designed to carry a team of 6, but the pilot is now getting the most out of it to carry a team of 6, and you're heavily laden. I mean, your backpack is weighing 70, 80, 90 kilos because most of it is water, then ammo, and not just your own ammunition, but also that for the mortar that you're carrying, and then a little bit of food, and then maybe something else. I was the signaler, so I had the big radio, and the radio needs a lot of spare batteries. So you're carrying that immediately. You don't have much space in your backpack.
So lead us into a situation where you actually engaged the enemy or saw the results of your mine laying. Could you give us an overview of that, maybe?
Yep, I can. So we got to a stage where flying in from Abaluta was too far, and they decided they were going to move us to Buffalo Range. There's not much at Buffalo Range. I mean, they don't want you to go anywhere else. So you got the airstrip and so on there, and this is where we were camped out and we were working. And we bumped into a few guys there from the Scouts and from C Squadron and people coming through, but they told us to keep our distance. And on this particular op, they didn't have planes to drop us off, and they said we're going to have to walk in. So we had the engineers take us to the minefield. So for those who don't know, that eastern side of the border, there's a long strip that is got mines in it, so it's been laid out. You've got all different types of mines. You've got those that are triggered by wire trigger mechanisms, those who pick up heat and movement, the plowshare, and all of the other stuff. And then these guys take you through, and you've got to step on exactly where the other guys have stepped on. You go through. So we then had to walk in the operation. So we were going down, walking in about 35 kilometers into where there was a military base. There were a lot of locals, and our job was to go in and create as much havoc as we can. There were some infiltration routes and roads that were being used for resupply, and our job was to lay ambushes, cause the havoc, and then shoot and scoot and get out again. I just remember the Mopani flies walking down those gommels. Now, I'm the signaler. So every time we stop, we walk for an hour and rest for 5 minutes. And when it gets very hot, your radio signal doesn't carry. So the base is not getting, when we're doing our scheduled report, we couldn't raise them. And we're struggling and so on. And there's a photograph that somebody took of me. I've got a face veil over my face like this. You can't see me. I look like a gingerbread man. I've just got my pot flies all over me.
Yeah.
And the worst thing about you squish one, and then you seem to attract everybody and his cousin.
4 million come to the funeral.
Yeah.
And the mosquitoes at night. I mean, I almost refused to go back into that area because of the mozzies. They were dreadful.
Luckily, that time of the year when you go in September, October, it's fairly dry. You higher up in the gommels before you go down into the valleys to where we were. So there were less mosquitoes there, and we covered a lot of ground. On the first day, I think we covered about 25 Ks or the 35 we had to cover. So we were still in the foothills, but we weren't in our target destination. And we were still struggling with comms. They sent up a plane high up, and then on HF radio we could communicate with them, but the plane's got to be very high. And of course, the guys know if there's a plane up in the area, there's some activity somewhere. I mean, they're not stupid. So we then crossed the last bit of the high terrain, the gommels, going down in the Mopani trees, getting down into the bottom of the valleys. And once we got down there, it was late afternoon. There were a lot of locals in the area, but we had to then sort of find a way so that they wouldn't see us. You think they're not going to see you. These guys know everything.
They're amazing.
So we think we're sneaking in. So we're walking in water in a little stream that was going up. It's marshy, it's muddy and so on. There were cattle and so on. And I remember then we had to cross a big river, but it was nighttime. Across the river, one of the guys lost his boots. For whatever reason, he took them off to cross through, because the thought was cross over, and on barefoot, if they see you're barefoot, they're going to know. look, the white man's foot is not used to, it's very different to the black man's foot, and the black man has been walking barefoot all the time. His foot shape is very different. You can see it.
Yeah.
So we crossed through, we lay in the reeds all night. Early morning, we then moved up. We saw there was too much of the local population there, so we went into a thicket. So now there are 3 teams of 6, so there are 18 of us in there. There's quite a lot of firepower ready to do, I think. And we're sitting there now, we're waiting, but there are too many people moving around. And then the people would know who've worked in the areas like this, you hear the sound of a cowbell. Ding, 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 ding.
Ding. Yeah.
So the people who don't know, when the locals who work there, and they work with the militia and they work with the local military in the area, if they spot something or know something's afoot, literally afoot, and they see a sign of that, they get the little herd boy with his cows to walk with his herd of cattle, because he's no threat to anybody, to walk around. And this guy sees everything, he knows everything. And we heard the cowbell, and eventually the cowbell had done a complete 360 around, I think. In the meantime, I've got to raise comms with HQ, because we can't get through to them, and I'm struggling. I can't get my slant wire up on my HF radio to get up high enough. So I decided, brilliant idea, I'm going to use my knife. Here's the knife that I was carrying in those days. So that's the knife thing. Now, normally your knife is dull and blackened, but Idiot Ashton has a very nice shiny blade.
Yeah.
So what do? It's a nice survival knife. It's expensive. So if you see that thing over there, you can see it. Can you see
Beautiful knife. Yeah.
So I tie the end of the rope to the antenna, and I throw it up in the tree. Now, when you're throwing a knife into a tree and you're playing and you're throwing knives, you want the blade to go into the tree and to do it. When you're using it as a way to go over, because there's only sand there, you want it to go between the trees and over. And what happened every time? A knife would get stuck in the tree. Now I'm trying to pull it, and the tree is doing this. Of course, our group commander, Andre Didriks, who's passed on now, was very angry with me, and he said, you got to do something about it. First of all, he talked to my section head, and who then ripped a strip off me. Anyway, I put a piece of wood on the end, onto them, stabbed in properly. Then I could use this very shiny, nice thing to throw up in the air and through the branches, pull the antenna up. And for the first time in 2 days, we were able to make scheduled communication with HQ. Told them what was happening, and they said, oh, they had a spotter plane up, and they said there were a lot of militia in the area, and they had moved in some of the local Frelimo guys. So it'd be best for us if we moved, because things were not going to be very nice very soon. Well, they hadn't even finished that when the guys open up fire with us, on us. They RPGs, they had 82mm mortars, and I think they had some of those B10s as well. We were in the thick of it at the moment, and the guys said, escape and evasion, plan B, not plan A anymore. And we knew where we had to go, because part of your training, you demarcate or you allocate a point, a rendezvous point, should anything happen. But when we came out of that bush, it was like going to a wedding. And I don't mean song and dance. The confetti that came down on us, that confetti was the trees, the tree leaves and the bark and everything else. Thank goodness these guys shoot high.
Yeah.
But and you don't hear the sound, it's funny. And years later, when you get used to it, yes, you hear the sound of fire. But I think this was like the first really big firefight when I was on the receiving end. Oh, you don't hear anything for the first, I think for the first 30 seconds, you don't hear anything. And I think it's like slow motion. But we knew what we had to do. So we had to run across these open fields. So you got sorghum and maize and beans and everything else. And there were ant heaps here and there. And who takes position on the ant heaps? The militia guys. So he's sitting with his AK on the thing, taking pot shots at you. So we took out a few of the guys as we were running. There was some guy with an RPG who took more shots. He gapped it because he didn't have any more ammo. And then somebody with a light machine gun, which I assume was an RPD. None of us were hit. You know, that we in open plain field. I mean, it's just an issue of training. And we had to run. We had to cover a distance of about 4 or 5 kilometers open field. So we'd stop, regroup, go down into a defensive position, fire, sometimes do a bit of fire and movement, neutralize whoever was creating a problem for us, and then continue running as we had to, until we got to the river, which we had to cross again, which was the Limpopo River. Crossed the river, and at this stage, the heavies had come in. So there were some BRDMs, and they had 82mm mortars and B10s, and they were firing them at us. You cross the river in that particular place where you were, and you've got to climb the embankment the other side. But the embankment is about 4 or 5 meters high. It's not easy to get up. We managed to get some guys up, and then with rope, we pulled all the guys up, got to the top. We were soaking wet at this stage. It was getting dusk, and they carried on firing at us. So they were doing sporadic fire with the 82mm mortar, chased us all over the place. None of us were hit. We were pretty good spirits as well. We wanted to go back and go and take them on again. And our orders were, no, first of all, regroup, and under the cover of darkness, we'll get further instructions in, which we did. Their vehicles moved close, and the whole night they were doing sporadic fire. They were trying to either locate where we were. Hopefully we would respond with fire so they could, or not, and we didn't. So we went into the lower area of the Gommels, and we were there for the night. And then they said, no, we need to move out of here. So early morning, it was at first light already. We packed up and ready to go. And what taken us a day and a half to cover when we came in, we walked out in about 7 hours. Now you're carrying all of your equipment. You haven't expended very little, a little bit of your food, a little bit of your ammo, and some of your water. So 7 hours, we were back at the boundary fence where we had to go through the minefield again. We get to the other side. What are we going to do? No, you got to go back again. Load up with more ammo, more stuff. And we went back down again into it, and then we laid some ambushes. And it was nice. When I say nice for us, we hit ambushes, small teams like 10 or 12 guys. We hit some single guys walking along the railway track. And it's, when you've got a well-oiled machine that's running, you have your guys which are laid out. So now we 18 of us in this group. You got your early warning guys out there, your scouts, and you got people behind you. And this is when you're on a road. We had some landmines which we planted as well because the vehicles were coming through. We never heard any of the vehicles being detonated on or detonating any of the mines. But while we were busy doing this, we had guys who walked through. And obviously then you have to withdraw your mine planting team, and you have to initiate the ambush. We did that on one road in that particular scene, and then in another op later on, we did the same thing, and we also did on the railway track. But the guys who walk on the railway track, they don't expect somebody like us there. Some of them got their rifles over their shoulder, walking along, talking like they're out for a Sunday afternoon, but going off to a soccer match or something like that. So we did a lot of operations like that. I remember seeing one of the guys, and from SAS, from C Squadron, who'd landed on some sandalwood. Now, sandalwood in that area, what happens is when the fires burn, the inside of the sandalwood burns out, and the outer hardwood stays behind. Really, really hard. They make those chairs out of it, which the locals make chairs, and they put the one piece into the other, but you pull it out, you can collapse and put on your head. But the stuff stands like this, and it's normally really sharp. And I remember a guy landing on this at night, and piece went in through the side of his calf muscle, out the back of his calf, into the back of his thigh, and out the front. I mean, he was really in a bad state. And what you going to do? You cut as much as you can, but you got to casevac him like that. We had guys who walked into a swarm of bees. Now, nobody trains you for something like this. And this time of the year, the bees are very angry and they're moving. And the guys walked into a swarm of bees. And we had to send the helicopter in to pick them up. And eyes were swollen shut on some of them. They couldn't see a thing. And the one guy was close to going to anaphylactic shock due to all of the bees things. Doing this type of operation was different in many respects. So your armament changes as well. We had guys who used Browning semi-automatic shotguns with the extended magazine, so they could carry 8 rounds with them. And for close quarters in the bush, it's an excellent weapon. Get out into the open, you're useless. We also used to carry silenced AK-47s as well, because we used AKs for operations there. And the silenced AK-47 is fine to use if you're using for the purpose where it needs to be silent. Get into a firefight, it's useless because you've got a subsonic round. They've adapted the round so it doesn't make the noise, and you have a problem. So the guys with the LMGs or the RPDs or PKMs in terms of machine gun power are the guys that they need to come to the fore. But when you're then down to 6-man teams, which we mostly were, we got to a stage where we decided we weren't going to carry silenced AK-47s. The guys had carried a 2.2 Beretta, which with a silencer on it, and it's very much like the Mossad in Israel used to use a silence to eliminate people. But you're going to be quite close to these guys to be able to do it. When I say close, within this distance, and a guy who's going to be who knows he's going to die with the possibility, trust me, he's going to fight. He's really going to fight. So Yeah, so we did a lot of these ops over a period of time. Eventually, you feel like you're going to the supermarket. You're just in and out and in and out and in and out, and you don't have much of a reprieve. Then the rains came, and the vehicles were having a problem getting in and out, and they thought we need a bit of R&R, so they sent us back to Salisbury. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. Went to the Monomatapo, we went to Coq d'Or and places like that maybe we shouldn't have. Got into a bit of trouble. I was driving a whole group of guys because I was a duty officer for the day, and I was driving one of the crocodiles, the big armor-plated vehicles on the Mercedes chassis, and driving through the suburbs, the back end of the Monomatapa. And you can't see out of these things. I mean, you got the hatch in front and a little bit on the side. And I said to my co-driver, I said to him, can I turn left? Is it fine? Because you've got to take quite a wide berth to go left. But he was reading something and he said, yeah, you can turn left. He looked up. He didn't really look carefully. Anyway, I turned left. I thought, gee, this thing is not going well, Changed down from second gear into first, and I pull forward like this. And as I'm carrying on driving, people are jumping the road and doing this and trying to stop me. I said, what's this about? So I pull over, get out the hatch to the top. The guy says, did you not see that Mini on the side of the road? I said, what Mini? They said, well, exactly what Mini? There was a little Mini being driven by a student on the left of me. He snuck in and he shouldn't have. I mean, this is an uneducated driver. He snuck in and I was a bit away from the pavement because I knew I was going to turn left, but he was there and he was a youngster. His Mini he bought it secondhand, and his folks had given him a lot of money, and he really dolled this thing up because he showed us photographs of it afterwards. It was beautiful. Do you remember that Martin's Marvelous Mini you used to get in the British cartoons?
Yeah.
It was really nice little Mini. Well, I'd squashed this thing up against the tree, and there was a lamp pole over there. Well, there was nothing left of this, and there was a bit of paintwork off there, and the one fender on the side of the crocodile had been bent slightly, and that was it. There was no damage. But anyway, I had to fill in the incident report and do all of those things.